Boom! Welcome to this Coach's Corner video taken from the 11th of January, where we talked about nourishment, getting beyond meal plans, beyond weight management, and actually talking about having some self-compassion and looking at what the body really needs, how to get the right amounts of protein, carbohydrates, and fats from a variety of good sources, and also how we can make changes sustainably and avoid all or nothing thinking. As you enjoy it, please share it with anyone else that you think would find use from it. And if you want to work with me on your company's well-being strategy, please hit the link in the description and book in a 15-20 minute coffee and catch up with me. Otherwise, guys, enjoy the video.
That's a good setup, because actually, guys, tonight we're going to talk all about nourishment, and kind of as we precluded to in last week's Coach's Corner, we talked about setting up the week and setting up our kind of 2021 and how we can bring together pillars of wellness and well-being to look after our health and to be healthy, more active individuals and optimal individuals going forward, and avoid the new year, new me. Nourishment is kind of the first in these this block of 6 that we're going to talk about over the next 6 weeks, which is really, really cool. And it can be very easy that anytime we start looking at food, Grace will throw this over to you in a moment, but every time we start looking at food, it's almost like we suddenly get caught up into what's the purpose of this. So it's like, oh, I'm eating for weight loss, or oh, I'm eating for sports performance, or oh, I'm eating because I'm hungry. Like, it's almost like nutrition can be overcomplicated almost just simply by our approach of us going, right, it's got to fulfill this purpose, rather than just allowing food to be what food is, which is something which is nourishing for the body, for the mind, for the soul, that can bring a lot of social enjoyment, simple enjoyment, immediate enjoyment. There's a whole load of that stuff that it does, and it just kind of relaxing into that and letting the purpose kind of come second. So if I kind of wanted to open with saying, first and foremostly, when we talk about nourishment, we're going to get into how you can utilize it to fulfill purposes, yes, but sometimes it's nice just to allow food to be food and something to be enjoyed, don't you think?
Absolutely. That is exactly like why we actually had pie and chips for tea, because we were like, it's been a cold day, we just want, like, that warm food that just like makes you feel good. Yeah, that was a bit of food for the soul.
It's that moreish nourishment that you want.
Yeah.
So I kind of just thought, and a good way of kind of opening from there is to kind of talk that obviously when we look at our nutrition, we can be looking at it for weight loss, sports performance, as we've said, and we can look into those details. And beyond that, kind of what is important with our nutrition choice and our food choices and the conversation that we have with ourselves. And something that I have been learning and reading a lot more about and kind of trying to expand my ability as a coach around is kind of looking at self-compassion. And it's not beating ourselves up over the choices that we make. And I think especially right now, and especially over the last, and we talked about last week, that new year, new me spike, and then things get in the way, life gets in the way, and possibly some of the decisions or the healthy habits you tried to implement last week weren't as successful as you wanted them to be. I think this idea of self-compassion is really important, isn't it? To keep engaging in the pursuit of health or pursuit of well-being as a whole, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea of, we talk about, obviously we've spoken a lot about food and we have consistently talked about balance, but I think the kind of like the societal and like the story we have around food in like society is like that when we have like treat food, the fact that it's even called that is like it makes you feel guilty.
Yeah.
And that's where that self-compassion like is really important, because you're allowed to have that food. Like nobody's saying you can't have it. So it's, yeah, and sometimes, sometimes everybody needs like a movie night with donuts and popcorn, and because that's good for the soul and like it's good for your connection with other people. And so yeah, I think it's just that kind of, it's learning to accept to like not feel guilty, and you have to learn a bit of acceptance, which I have obviously done a video on, but if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, and then Jake can see them because I can't see them on my phone.
We can prove them out. But I think it's cool as well. I think it's perfect, Grace. And guys, the important thing is definitely what we're going to do is we'll tag in this video Grace's Instagram handle, because she puts a huge amount of stuff there as well. So it's another really good resource for your mindset and mental well-being pieces to come. I always like this saying that with food is that you have absolute permission to eat absolutely anything you want. It doesn't mean you should eat everything that you want. And do you get what I mean from that? So it's like there is no food is off limit. Like no individual food is inherently bad for us, really. In the quantities that food is, it's not like drugs that, you know, if you consume too much ibuprofen in one sitting, it's going to have a really adverse effect on your health. Yeah. Whereas food, it doesn't have that same acute response. It takes repeated abuse as such with food to reach that. So they say that you can eat anything you like, and there are going to be times where you just want to eat this one thing, or, you know, you've got a craving for chocolate. You know, you hear sometimes, I have really random cravings sometimes. It's like, right, I actually just want something savory, but I want a big portion of it. And things like that. So it's important to see that there are no foods off limit. And I think that's where that self-compassion and that making it okay doesn't make you bad, or there's no bad thing for consuming certain foods. The only thing to be considerate of is how much you're eating of it. And sometimes, again, that's going to break. And there are going to be areas where you need to be a little bit more fluid and flexible with yourself, and flexible with the paradigm, or what you set yourself. But you do have complete choice and flexibility within that.
And I think it's also how often as well. Like you can have those like treats. I can't think of another word right now, but that one's really bugging me. But you can have those like nice foods that might, like, that you wouldn't want to have too regularly. Like you can have them. Like I enjoyed 2 donuts yesterday, and I don't feel guilty. I would have felt guilty, but I don't feel guilty because I know that, like, I don't even know when I will eat that many donuts again. So it's like, I think it's just that like, because I know you're like a lot more into nutrition than me, but I'm just thinking from like the self-compassion thing. Like, do you know what you've eaten it now? So like, it's just, where are you going to use that energy?
Yeah,
because you could use that energy to berate yourself about eating those foods, or you could use that energy the rest of the week to help you like nourish yourself through your food in a different way. And you just got to pick which one you want to do.
Exactly. And it kind of comes into, so looking at our nutrition choices, and it's a term that everyone has heard me throw around so much, in terms of what the body needs from a nutrition point of view, and what do we need to nourish ourselves. And it can get very confusing when you have an article here that says this, an article here that says that. I know right now we're in January, so generally a lot of what goes on is people talk about massively reducing alcohol, either pursuing veganuary and looking at removing animal produce from their diet. And then with that comes a whole load of people arguing the opposite, because whenever you push one in particular, or one, not necessarily extreme, because I would never say that veganism is extreme, it's just one end of a spectrum, or one towards one end of a spectrum.
Yeah.
You're always going to have a counter argument come up at the other end. You're always going to have someone come up. So you kind of have, and within that creates conflicting information, and things can get very confusing around nutrition. But what the really cool thing is, the majority of nutritional science agrees on the majority of things. And what these arguments and these kind of different stances are either to do with methodologies. They're simply down to whether or not people are going to adhere to what they do. So they're more of a tactic for adherence, as opposed to something that's healthy. But obviously, if you are more adherent to something and a way of eating that gets in more nutrients for you and is more nourishing, it's going to be better for you. So people argue over the way to do it. And that's like arguing how to paint a wall. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if the wall is painted, the methodology actually doesn't matter if the methodology leans on the same foundations. And those foundations are what we talk about from what the body needs. So it's a massive wide variety of plants. The majority of the food on your plate should always be from plants. It should always have a variety of color, bringing you essential fiber, kind of probiotics, and looking at the other sources of vegetables that provide you that, which things that, your cruciferous vegetables are fantastic for that. So it's like your broccolis, your spinach, things like that. And as well as, onions, garlic can also have a role in supporting gut bacteria from a plant-based point of view. And the majority of food is built from that stage. You then look at adding in some protein on top, and protein generally, 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. Keep it nice and simple. And that can come from plant or animal source, really. In the grand scheme of things, it can come from either or. If you're going for plant-based, you're going to want to have more variety. Again, anything with plants, variety is king. The more variation brings more nourishment. And you might have to get a bit creative with mixing different proteins together. So often you want to have multiple sources of plant protein in the same meal, just to cover that off. And then there is, you need fats in your diet. We need a source of omega-3. If you are pursuing a vegan or vegetarian-based diet, you may want to supplement omega-3 because EPA and DHA can be slightly harder to get from whole food plant sources. It's not impossible. It's just more challenging to get the equivalent levels of eating a little bit of oily fish 3 times a week. So it may be worth looking at a supplement from that point of view. But as long as you kind of do all of that within an energy balance that's appropriate for you, and guys, if anyone's watching this and wants help with exactly what that appropriateness is, just drop a message to me and I'll get that sorted. But that kind of is the simplicity of nutrition rolled into 2 minutes. Eat loads of plants, get enough protein in, 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilo, and get a balance of healthy fats. And if you are vegetarian or vegan, possibly look at an omega-3 supplement that is vegan based with a good amount of EPA and DHA. Alongside that, the main things with nutrition and nourishment for you, and if you're doing that and having 3 to 4 meals a day or 3 to 4 sittings of food, so that could be breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack. It could be lunch, dinner, and 2 snacks. It could be a variation of that. The most important thing right now is that what is looking ahead and what do you do to make change? So that big thing, and we think plants is probably the easiest thing to lean on because it's the most obvious way of improving dietary quality is the number of different plants you can consume. And it is so easy to increase. It's also easy to overdo it and suddenly go, right, I'm going to have like 30 vegetables, and then you get overwhelmed by either your shopping, like what you're putting in, or how to fit them all into a meal. And then suddenly the meal on your plate is just like an amalgamation of some strange vegetables. You're like, how does this work? It's not tasty. So I think it comes down to everything we talked about from goal setting before, is that it's about making changes day to day and moving forward with it, isn't it? Which actually can be one of the hardest things.
Yeah, I was just about to say actually, and I think especially depending on how you like perceive food, because some people do just perceive it as a fuel, it's something they've got to do, or like fear around cooking new things, or these are all things that can like put people off. Is like not necessarily knowing what or how to cook it. We tend to like sticking to our habits, especially with food, and especially at the minute when you're perhaps juggling a lot more things. So one thing that I would really suggest is actually before you even go to the shop is you don't have to suddenly, like Jake said, you don't need to suddenly change like 6 meals a week. Like you can start small, find one recipe that you want to try, write down the list of ingredients that you need from that, because then that prevents that overwhelm of all those like ending up with like a billion vegetables, and it's not as overwhelming. And actually, do you know what, if you don't like the dish, it doesn't matter, you just pick a different one next time. I think it's that thing of, well, if we try it, like we feel like we have to like it, but we don't, and like it's fine, just pick a different recipe. So I think just don't be, I think the fear of something new or the fear of it not going as you planned can be the biggest thing that stops people from even starting to make that change.
No, I think you're completely right. Completely right. And you mentioned something earlier as well within that is that on top of when someone's made a decision to make a change and then they have a donut. And as you said earlier, like, you enjoyed your donut, didn't you? It was a great.
Yeah, well, both of them, yeah.
And both of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to throw the word out there because it wouldn't be a coach's corner if I didn't say all or nothing thinking.
No, I know. I was expecting that one earlier, and then you surprised me with what the body needs.
I just thought I'm going to save that one. But it's that whole thing. You've enjoyed 2 donuts. It's brilliant. Like, you enjoyed having them. You've got a massive amount of back for you for doing so. But the way in which we kind of that all or nothing thinking thing that kicks in is suddenly someone going, right, I'm going to have 3, 4, 5, 6. It's having a cookie out of a packet and then going fuck it and eating the whole packet. And it's that self-sabotage that comes in because it's like, oh, I'm on track or I'm off track. I'm with it or I'm not with it. And that whole thing can be a disruptive way of thinking it. And that's we started with talking about being compassionate to yourself. At times you're going to need to have, for your own mental sanity, it could mean any number of reasons why you want something sweet or sugary or something that's less optimal as a food choice. It's important to be compassionate with yourself that it's okay to do that. And like I said, there is no food off limit, and you can eat anything you want. You just can't eat all of it. Can't eat all of them. So it's just don't eat the whole packet of biscuits.
Yeah.
And that will set you up, and everything, like Grace, that you've already shared around making changes. That will set you up for success for your health long term, because then that's where you start being able to have the cookies, the takeaway meal, guilt free. Because often it's in my coaching experience, I see that often the biggest destructor for people's results, and if they're pursuing weight loss or pursuing sports performance, the biggest thing that gets in the way of them actually nourishing themselves on a regular basis is that all or nothing thinking, the self-sabotage that comes in with one thing, and then that lack of self-compassion that says it's okay, and okay within a reason. Again, it leans on that thing, but it's okay for you to have that indulgence every so often, but the guilt drives further abuse, or the guilt drives the binge. And often you'll find is if we can remove the guilt part and make it I did this because I wanted something sweet and it's okay. Often you'll find that can break a lot of binge cycles for people.
Definitely.
And again, that's a coaching experience piece. That's an anecdote. That's not a scientific reference. So that's how it works. But
you're not far wrong, to be fair. It is that's one of the biggest ways to change that cycle. Because those kind of cycles are feeding off the emotions that you attach around the food. So when you then change the emotion that you attach to that behavior, it then changes the behavior as a result. So even though it was anecdotal, there is proven science too. Occasionally
I come out with a piece of gold. So in terms of looking at that nourishment piece from you're saying, changing the emotion, what's the best way of trying to identify the emotion you're applying to food and then work on it so that you can actually start to unpack and unravel that guilt?
Yeah, and I think different things will work for different people, but in general, I guess now I'm going more anecdotal, but from my experience of work, because sometimes what we say in science does not necessarily always reflect easily in real world practice. So I would say it's about identifying what foods you have that kind of relationship with. So what foods will you binge on? And do you notice that when you're oh, I feel really shit today, I'm going to have a glass of wine. I feel really shit today. I feel really sad, that meeting was really shit, so you go and get some biscuits. It's about figuring out when you feel bad, or what food is it that you go and get. And then I've worked with a few clients where they've actually either potentially split that food into like separate food bags. So if it's biscuits, okay, well, how many biscuits are you going to allow yourself each day? Instead of the whole packet, okay, you're going to have 3 biscuits. So then you put Monday, put the 3 biscuits in it. You're still allowing yourself that food, but actually there's that visual prompt. It's kind of it's related to like nudge theory. So it's about changing like the environmental cues to change the behavior and the emotion. But you have to recognize what foods it is with first. And then also having a list of alternatives. So after you've had the 3 biscuits and you're like, I still want more. Well, if you know what the emotion is, what other things help remove that emotion that's not food?
Yeah.
So is it putting a song on that you like, that like lifts your mood? Is it petting the dog, going literally walking around the block or around your garden, seeing as we should be staying home as much as possible? Like, so it's about kind of giving yourself those alternatives that help lift your mood when you're using food as like a comfort.
Yeah. No,
I hope that answers your question. I felt quite waffly.
no, it does completely. I think what do you think that would be good for people to do is that if you do find that you eat emotionally quite often, or you do feel that sometimes that's reflects in your habits quite a lot, just noting it down is quite useful to kind of get the same way I talk about with when people are looking at exercise or their food in general, like recording it is always the number one place to start to get awareness. So
Definitely.
if you're finding that you're eating from an emotional standpoint, you don't have to do it like as a deadline. It's like over a couple of days. It's just every time you pick up something and you're doing something from an emotional standpoint, just note it. And it's a very light touch, not to make yourself wrong or not to add any emotion to it, but just to go, right, this emotion was attached with me eating this, and this is how much I had. And then review that after 2 weeks. And that would start to help someone unravel that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And I think writing it down is really good as well, because you've actually got the evidence in front of you. Because sometimes when we don't have it in front of us, it can be quite easy to actually, if I change that, it can be quite difficult to accept that that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas when it's there in front of you, you can't really deny it. Yeah.
So, and to be fair, recording in terms of if you're trying to make nutritional changes and looking at nourishment as a whole, recording things down is always going to be a good place to start if you're trying to make changes. And again, it's not about recording to blame or to attach anything to it. It's just recording it so that then you can review it and then go, right, where do I need to improve to get whatever I want out of it? If it's general health, it's just energy control and more plants. If you're trying to lose weight, it's like, right, how do I reduce the energy I'm consuming and how do I move a bit more? If you're trying to put muscle on, it's just how can I continue to hit protein targets while also exercising on a regular basis? And I think that's the easiest thing to take away. And ultimately, nourishment in terms of from a simply nutritional point of view is all about plants. Consume as many as possible, as wide a variety as possible. It supports the microbiome, plenty of fiber, and you don't really need to get any more complicated than that. Just eat lots of plants. And everything seems to work fine.
It's far simpler than I ever imagined.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, what we've kind of covered today, Grace, is that nourishment and food is incredibly important for our health, but it's also incredibly important for our happiness. And I said at the start, like there are social elements in future with food. Just in your own home, time that you spend sitting down for dinner, trying not to do it in front of the TV. Don't do it, in front of a computer or eating at your desk. Take that time to create food as a separate thing, and that will help drive improvements in your overall health. Happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And just also, if you are having to use your dining room as a desk, because Mum has currently got 3 screens on the dining table. Don't worry if you do have to sit on your sofa just for the time being. But when you're allowed to go back in the office, Jamaica, an effort to try and use your dining table.